Untouchable, the quiet power of dangerous confidence. Introduction. The room already knows. You walked in 3 minutes late. Not catastrophically late, just enough to feel the eyes. And before you even reached your seat, you were already apologizing. Not out loud, necessarily, but in the way you held your shoulders. In the half-smile you threw at nobody in particular. In the speed of your steps, like you owed the room an explanation for existing in it. Nobody asked you to apologize. You just did it automatically. That reflex, that constant, low-grade bracing for judgment, is costing you more than you think. Not occasionally. Every day. In boardrooms and bedrooms. In the way you answer questions you weren't even asked. In the way you stay quiet when you should speak and over-explain when you should be silent. In the way you check your phone after posting something, waiting to see if the number goes up, because somewhere along the way you started measuring your worth in other people's reactions. Here's what nobody told you. The room already knows. People can feel when someone needs their approval. They can sense the hunger for validation before a single word leaves your mouth. It's in the posture, the pacing, the nervous laughter, the way you hedge every opinion with "I don't know, maybe I'm wrong," but they can feel it, and whether they're conscious of it or not, they respond to it. Not with respect, with distance, or worse, with leverage. That's the enemy this book is here to name. Not your past, not your circumstances, not the people who criticized you or dismissed you or never gave you the credit you deserved. The enemy is the operating system running underneath all of that. The one that says your value is something other people assign to you. The one that keeps you explaining, overperforming, reacting, shrinking, adjusting, always adjusting, trying to make yourself acceptable to a room that was never your judge to begin with. That operating system is what we're replacing. This book is not for everyone. Let's be precise about that. If you're looking for permission to be arrogant, close it now. If you want a list of power poses and scripted one-liners to fake your way through a room, this isn't it. If you believe confidence is something you're either born with or you're not, this book will frustrate you because it will ask more of you than that excuse allows. But if you've suspected, even quietly, even briefly, that there's a version of you that doesn't flinch, doesn't beg, doesn't hand the remote control of your emotions to whoever walks through the door next, then this was written for you. If you're tired of feeling like your confidence depends on whether today was a good day or a bad one, if you've caught yourself performing instead of living, if you've ever made a decision based on what someone else would think instead of what you actually knew was right, this book was written for you. Not for who you want to be eventually, for who you already are when the noise stops. Here is what this book promises, plainly. By the time you reach the final page, you will have dismantled every habit, reflex, and belief that keeps you fragile. You will understand why real confidence is not loud, it's calm. It's not demanding, it's still. It's not earned by accumulating approval. It's built by systematically needing less of it. You'll walk away with a different relationship to silence, to rejection, to discomfort, to the word no, and to the version of yourself that no longer requires the world's permission to move forward. This is not about pretending to be someone you're not. This is about stripping away everything that isn't you. The work begins the moment you stop explaining why you deserve to be here. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Silence is not rudeness, it's authority. Here's the lie you've been living, that explaining yourself is a form of respect. It isn't. It's a form of fear. Every time you pile on reasons, qualifications, and backstory to justify a decision you've already made, you're not being thoughtful. You're negotiating for approval you shouldn't need. You're sending a signal, quietly but clearly, that your choices are only valid if someone else agrees with them. And people receive that signal whether you intend it or not. Think about the last time you over-explained something. Maybe you canceled plans and spent 4 sentences apologizing when 2 words would have done it. Maybe someone questioned your decision at work and you launched into a full defense before they'd even finished their sentence. Maybe you bought something, made a choice, changed direction, and then felt this pull, almost magnetic, to justify it to anyone nearby. Not because they asked, because the silence felt like accusation. That pull is not courtesy. That pull is the approval habit at work. Confident people don't live in apology mode. Not because they're cold, and not because they don't care about others, but because they've drawn a clear line between explaining and over-explaining, between communication and confession. There's a version of explanation that is useful, giving context when it's genuinely needed, communicating clearly with someone who has a real stake in your decision. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the explanations you give to people who didn't ask, about choices that don't require their input, in situations where the only real function of your words is to make you feel less exposed. That's not communication. That's performance. And every time you perform, you signal that your internal verdict on your own choices isn't final. When you stop over-explaining, something uncomfortable happens first. The silence you leave behind feels enormous. It feels rude. It feels like you've left something unfinished. That discomfort is not a sign you've done something wrong. It's the sound of an old reflex losing its grip. Let it go. There's a man, a senior partner at a firm who was known for giving exactly the response the situation required and nothing more. Someone would challenge him in a meeting, expect pushback, expect defense, expect the back and forth. He'd pause, look at them, and say, simply, "I've made my decision." Full stop. No footnotes. No softening. No invitation to keep debating. Just that. And the room, every time, would recalibrate. Not because he was dismissive, because he was certain. And certainty, delivered without aggression, is one of the most disarming things a human being can project. People don't actually want more of your reasoning. They want to know whether you believe your reasoning. And you demonstrate that not by explaining it more, but by needing to explain it less. Watch what happens in conversations when you strip out the filler. When instead of, "I'm so sorry, I know this is probably inconvenient. I just thought maybe it would work better if we tried," you say, "I'd like to go this direction." And then you stop. The other person now has to respond to your clarity instead of dissecting your doubt. You've changed the entire dynamic of the exchange without raising your voice, without conflict, without a single aggressive word. Pure structure, pure calm. That is what authority sounds like. It doesn't boom. It doesn't demand. It simply doesn't leave room for negotiation where there isn't any. Short sentences when delivering hard truths. So here's one. Every unnecessary explanation you give is a small transfer of power. You hand a piece of it to the person listening. And over hundreds of daily interactions, that transfer accumulates. Not dramatically, quietly, until one day you look up and realize you've been living inside a version of yourself that was designed for other people's comfort, not your own clarity. The practice is simple. Not easy, but simple. This week, catch yourself mid-explanation. Not to shut down, not to become abrupt, but to ask one question before the words leave your mouth. Does this person actually need this? Or do I just need them to have it? If the answer is the second one, stop. Let your choice stand on its own. Say what's necessary. Then be quiet. Let the silence do the work that your words were trying to do out of insecurity. At first, you'll feel the urge to fill it. That urge is not your instinct. It's your habit, and habits can be broken. The less you explain, the more weight your words carry. The more weight your words carry, the less you need to say. And somewhere in that loop, tightening, compressing, clarifying, you'll find something you've been looking for. Not applause. The quiet, solid feeling of trusting your own decisions without a room full of witnesses to make them feel real. You've been translating your confidence into language hoping other people will hand it back to you validated. That's not how this works. Confidence isn't something you explain your way into. It's something you stop explaining your way out of. What's the voice inside your head saying while you're busy crafting all those explanations? And is it actually on your side? Chapter 2. The thermostat you never knew you had. The most dangerous conversation happening in your life right now isn't with your boss, your partner, or your harshest critic. It's the one no one else can hear. Most people spend enormous energy managing how they come across to the outside world, what they say, how they dress, what they post, how they laugh. And underneath all of that curated surface, an entirely different conversation is running. Constant, unfiltered, quietly brutal. You're not ready for this. They're all watching you. You always mess it up. Who do you think you are? That voice has been running so long you've stopped noticing it. It's just the weather, just the background, just how things are. But here's what you need to understand. That voice is not neutral. It is not simply observing you. It is building you or dismantling you, sentence by sentence, day by day, in the silence between everything else. Think about a thermostat. You set it to 65 degrees. The room cools down to 65. You walk in, it's cold, you add layers. You work harder to compensate. But the temperature never actually changes because the thermostat was set low before you ever walked in. Your internal voice works exactly this way. It sets the temperature of your confidence before any external situation ever begins. Walk into a room with a thermostat that says, "I don't belong here," and watch how you behave. The eyes that dart, the voice that shrinks, the laugh that comes too quickly, the opinion that stays safely unsaid. Nobody in that room lowered your temperature. The thermostat did it before you opened the door. This is why two people with identical skills walk into the same room, and one commands it while the other disappears into the corner. Same resume, different thermostat. Here's the mistake almost everyone makes. They wait. They think, once I get the promotion, I'll feel confident. Once people respect me, I'll talk to myself better. Once I have proof, I'll believe it. They're waiting for the outside world to hand them a reason to change the inner one. It doesn't work that way. It has never worked that way. The confidence doesn't precede the belief. The belief has to be set first, even without evidence, even without the resume, even before the room agrees with you. You don't wait for proof. You install the thermostat at the right temperature and then go collect the proof that confirms it. That's not delusion. That's sequence. Get the sequence right and everything downstream changes. Your brain is not interested in truth. It's interested in repetition. Whatever you repeat consistently, it begins to treat as fact, and then it starts filtering the world to confirm that fact. Tell yourself you're someone who can't hold it together under pressure, and your brain will helpfully highlight every moment you stumbled and quietly bury every moment you didn't. Tell yourself you're capable, steady, someone who figures things out, and the brain starts curating differently. Same life, different filter. That's not wishful thinking. That's how the mechanism actually works. So what does mastering the inner voice actually look like? Not toxic positivity. Not lying to yourself about being perfect when you're not. Dangerous confidence doesn't require illusions. It requires direction. The shift is from uncontrolled to deliberate. Right now, your inner voice is probably on autopilot, running commentary you inherited from old environments, old criticisms, old versions of yourself that no longer apply. Parents, teachers, rejection letters, that one moment at 16 that apparently still has tenure. The voice is running old programming in a life that has moved on. Your job is to take back editorial control. Not by drowning it in affirmations you don't believe, but by starting to challenge the verdict every time it comes down. When the voice says you're going to blow this, you don't have to say, "No, I won't. I'm amazing." You say, "Maybe, but I've handled harder things and I'm still here." That's not performance. That's evidence-based pushback. And it works because it's true. Over time, that habit, catching the verdict, questioning the verdict, replacing it with something grounded, rewires the default. Slowly, then suddenly. Here's a concrete practice. For the next 30 days, before you walk into anything that matters, a meeting, a conversation, a room where your confidence will be tested, say 3 things to yourself. Out loud if you can manage it. I respect myself. I can handle whatever comes today. I don't need anyone's approval to move forward. Not because those sentences are magic, because repetition is. Say them enough times in enough situations, and your nervous system starts treating them as baseline, not aspiration. The thermostat moves. 3 sentences, 30 days. The discomfort you feel saying them at the start is directly proportional to how much you needed to hear them. There's something else worth naming here. The inner voice doesn't just affect how you feel. It affects how you read situations. A low-set thermostat makes you interpret ambiguous signals as threats. Someone pauses before responding. They must be unimpressed. A meeting gets rescheduled. You must have done something wrong. Silence from someone you respect. Clearly it means something bad. That constant threat interpretation is exhausting. It makes you reactive, defensive, and here's the brutal part. It makes you easy to manipulate. Because anyone who figures out that your inner voice is already half convinced you're not enough only needs to apply the slightest external pressure to confirm what you're already telling yourself. A calibrated inner voice is armor, not arrogance. Armor. Chapter 1 was about what you say to the room. This chapter is about what the room inside your head is saying to you. Both matter, but get this one wrong, and everything in Chapter 1 collapses, because you'll be performing confidence with a voice in the background quietly contradicting every word. Get this one right, and you'll notice something that changes the game entirely. You stop needing the room to confirm what you already know. And once you stop needing the room's confirmation, the question becomes, what exactly are you still giving it that it never earned? Chapter 3. You can't fake what you don't own. Everyone wants to skip this chapter. They want the body language tips, the sharp one-liners, the presence-commanding entrances. They want the output without building the foundation it has to stand on. And that's exactly why so many people's confidence cracks under any real pressure, because it was never rooted in anything. It was decoration, and decoration doesn't hold when the weather turns. Self-respect is not the reward you collect after you've become confident. It's the ground confidence grows from. Get that sequence backwards, and you'll spend years performing strength for a crowd while privately feeling hollow, which, if you're honest, might already sound familiar. Here's a question worth sitting with. How do you treat people you genuinely respect? You listen to them. You don't waste their time. You take their decisions seriously without demanding they justify every one. You give them the benefit of the doubt when things are ambiguous. You hold them in a kind of regard that makes them feel, even in small moments, that they matter. Now ask yourself, with the same honesty, do you treat yourself that way? Or do you override your own needs to keep the peace? Agree with things that go against what you know is right? Allow situations to continue while past the point where you'd have told a friend to walk away. Let people speak to you in ways that, if directed at someone you loved, would have you furious on their behalf. The way you treat yourself is not a private matter. It becomes the standard you broadcast, invisibly but unmistakably, to everyone around you. People don't always consciously calculate it, but they feel it. They find the edges of your self-respect the same way water finds cracks, and they behave accordingly. Self-respect is not built in grand gestures. It's built in small, daily acts of integrity toward yourself. Promises kept, not to other people, but to you. The workout you said you'd do. The boundary you said you'd hold. The conversation you said you'd have instead of swallowing it for the 100th time. Every time you follow through on something you told yourself you'd do, you deposit something into the account. Not confidence, not yet. Something that comes before confidence, trust. The quiet, cellular-level knowledge that you are someone who can be counted on. By yourself. For yourself. And every time you break that agreement, every time you override your own values to avoid discomfort, every time you let something slide that you swore you wouldn't, you make a different kind of deposit, one that accumulates as a low, persistent sense that you can't fully rely on yourself, that your word, even to yourself, is conditional. That's not a mindset problem. That's an integrity problem, and no amount of positive self-talk patches it. Think about what self-respect actually looks like in practice, not in theory, not in a motivational caption, but in the ordinary friction of a real day. It looks like leaving a conversation that's designed to diminish you without explaining why or waiting for permission. It looks like saying that doesn't work for me and meaning it completely without the follow-up apology. It looks like waking up when you said you would, not because discipline is glamorous, but because you made a commitment to yourself and you're not the kind of person who breaks those quietly and pretends not to notice. None of these acts are dramatic. That's exactly the point. Self-respect isn't built in the moments you feel strong. It's built in the moments you don't feel strong, and you do it anyway. That gap between how you feel and how you act is where character forms. And character is the only thing that makes confidence permanent instead of circumstantial. Here's the thing about building self-respect that nobody frames correctly. It will cost you something. Some people in your life are comfortable with the version of you that doesn't have much of it. The version that absorbs, accommodates, bends, waits. When you start holding yourself to a higher standard, when you start treating your time and your values as non-negotiable rather than suggestions, some of those people will push back. They'll call it arrogance. They'll call it a phase. They'll wonder what's gotten into you. What's gotten into you is self-respect, and their discomfort with it is information, not a reason to retreat. The people worth keeping in your life will not be threatened by the fact that you've decided to matter to yourself. They'll adjust, or they'll reveal themselves. Either outcome moves you forward. Chapter 2 handed you control of the voice inside your head. This chapter is asking you to back that voice up with action, because a thermostat set high in a building with no insulation just bleeds heat into the cold. You can reprogram your inner voice every morning for a year. But if your daily behavior still says I don't matter, my needs are negotiable, my time is available to anyone who claims it, the voice and the behavior are in direct contradiction. And when the two contradict, the behavior wins. Always. Because the brain doesn't listen to what you say to yourself. It watches what you do. Build the respect first. Not the feeling of respect, the practice of it. The small, repeated, unsexy acts of treating yourself as someone whose choices, time, and values are worth defending. Do that long enough and something shifts that cannot be manufactured any other way. You stop needing to convince yourself you're worthy. You stop looking for evidence in other people's reactions. You simply, quietly, solidly know. And when you know, you stop performing. Confidence without self-respect is a mask on an empty face. Impressive from a distance, unsettling up close, and the first thing to fall when the pressure finds it. But respect, practiced in the small hours, in the ordinary friction, in the moments no one is watching, builds something underneath the surface that no external force can easily reach. Once you have that, confidence stops being something you put on. It becomes something you simply are. Now here's the uncomfortable question that follows. If you already respect yourself, why are you still so dependent on what other people think? Chapter 4. You gave them the remote. Picture this. You post something, an opinion, a decision, a piece of work you actually care about. And before you've done anything else, before you've made coffee or answered a message or moved on with your day, you're back. Checking, counting, reading the comments like they're a verdict on something bigger than a post. They are, in your head. That's the problem. Approval seeking is not a character flaw. It's a survival mechanism that outlived its usefulness. There was a version of your life, childhood, early school, early work, where reading the room and adjusting to fit it was genuinely adaptive. It kept you safe, included, accepted. The problem is that mechanism doesn't come with an off switch. And what was once useful intelligence becomes, in adulthood, a quiet prison. You're still scanning for threats that no longer exist. Still adjusting for rooms that no longer have power over you. Still handing the remote to people who have no business deciding what plays. Let's name exactly what approval dependency costs you, not philosophically, in practice. It costs you your decisions. Not the big ones necessarily, though those too, but the daily ones. What you wear, what you say in a meeting, whether you take the risk or play it safe, whether you speak the honest opinion or the acceptable one. Hundreds of micro decisions per day, each one slightly bent in the direction of what will they think instead of what do I actually know is right. Multiply that by years, and you get a life shaped more by other people's comfort than your own judgment. It costs you your stability. When your self-worth is indexed to approval, it moves with approval. Someone praises you, you feel solid. Someone criticizes you, you feel shaken. Someone ignores you, you spiral trying to decode why. You become, functionally, a weather vane, not pointed at any direction of your own, just spinning with whatever wind hits you. And here's the one that cuts deepest. It costs you your respect. Not theirs, yours. Because deep down, you know when you've bent. You know when you said what was safe instead of what was true. And that knowledge accumulates, quietly, as a kind of low-grade self-contempt that no amount of external validation can cancel out. Here's the mechanism nobody explains clearly enough. People may enjoy it when you seek their approval. It feels good to be deferred to. It's flattering to be the one someone adjusts themselves for. But they don't respect it. And eventually, even unconsciously, they stop taking you seriously because you've demonstrated that your position is always up for renegotiation, that your no might become a yes with enough pressure, that your opinion comes with an asterisk, subject to change based on your reaction. You've handed them the remote. And people, even good people, will change channels when they get bored. The moment you stop seeking approval, two things happen. First, some people won't like it. They've been operating under the assumption that your agreement was available on demand, and suddenly it isn't. They'll call it arrogance. They'll say you've changed, as if change were the accusation. Let them. Second, other people, the ones worth having around, will recalibrate. They'll start engaging with you differently, with more care, more genuine interest, because now there's actually someone there to engage with, not a mirror of their preferences, a person with a position. There's an important line to draw here before the idea gets misread. Enjoying praise is not the problem. Being genuinely moved when someone whose opinion you respect validates your work, that's human. That's fine. The problem is needing it. The problem is when the presence or absence of that praise determines whether you feel valuable. The difference between enjoying approval and needing it is the difference between drinking when you want to and drinking because you can't sit still without it. One is a pleasure. The other is a dependency. And like all dependencies, this one makes you manageable to anyone willing to dispense or withhold the thing you can't function without. Some people in your life figured this out about you a long time ago. They know which compliments settle you down. They know which silences make you anxious. They know exactly how much withdrawal it takes to make you come back seeking. They're not necessarily malicious. They just found a lever and they use it the way anyone uses a lever when it works. Stop making the lever available. The practice is this: start making decisions from the inside out instead of the outside in. Not recklessly, not without input when input is genuinely useful, but with the final question changed. Instead of what will they think of this, ask what do I know is right here. That shift sounds subtle. It restructures everything. Because once your reference point is internal rather than external, you stop being movable by every opinion that walks through the door. You become someone with a center of gravity. And people feel that. You feel it. Start small. Practice saying no without the explanation that comes after it. Practice making a choice and not announcing it for feedback. Practice sitting with someone's displeasure without immediately rushing to resolve it. Let the discomfort of their disapproval exist without treating it as an emergency that requires your action. It will feel unbearable at first. That's how you know it's working. Think about the people you admire most. Not like admire. The ones whose presence carries weight. The ones you'd actually listen to in a room full of noise. Are they the ones constantly checking who's clapping? Or are they the ones who seem, genuinely, structurally, indifferent to whether the room approves? It's always the second, because approval seeking makes you a performer. And performers are entertaining, but they're not leaders. They're not taken seriously when it matters. They're appreciated when things are easy and ignored when things are hard. Stop performing. There is no audience worth this much of your power. You've spent enough time letting other people hold the dial that controls how you feel about yourself. In Chapter 3, you started building a foundation that doesn't require their input. This chapter is where you stop providing the access point. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to make it dramatic. You just, gradually, deliberately, without apology, stop checking to see if they approve. And the silence where that checking used to be, that silence is an emptiness. That space that used to be occupied by other people's opinions and is now, finally, yours. What happens when someone tries to fill that space by force, by pushing, provoking, attacking, and you don't respond the way they expect? Chapter 5. The storm that didn't come. They were expecting a reaction. That was the whole point. Maybe it was a cutting remark in front of others, calculated to land. Maybe it was a challenge designed to make you defensive, to pull you into a back and forth where they had the advantage. Maybe it was silence, the weaponized kind, meant to make you anxious enough to come forward and expose yourself. Whatever the form, the structure was the same. Provocation delivered, reaction expected, power transferred. And then you said nothing. Not nothing out of cowardice. Not nothing because you had no response. Nothing because you understood something most people never figure out. The moment you react, you've confirmed you can be moved. And the moment someone knows you can be moved, they know how to move you. That is leverage. And you just refuse to hand it over. Emotional reactivity is one of the most expensive habits a person can carry. Not because it feels bad, though it does, but because it is, functionally, a control mechanism available to anyone patient enough to use it. The person who knows your triggers owns a skeleton key to your behavior. Push here, get this. Ignore there, get that. Challenge this thing, watch them unravel. You think you're responding. You're actually being operated. And here's the thing. You can be the most intelligent, capable, self-aware person in a room, and emotional reactivity will make none of that matter. The moment you snap, defend, explode, or crumble in response to a provocation, the content of your argument is irrelevant. What people see is the loss of control. And loss of control reads, universally, as weakness. Not passion, not authenticity. Weakness. The person who provoked you, they didn't even have to be right. They just had to be effective. And they were. Silence is not passivity. This distinction matters more than almost anything else in this book. Passive silence is the silence of someone who has nothing to say, or is afraid to say it, or is waiting to be given permission. That kind of silence reads like absence, like you checked out. It hands power away just as surely as reacting does. It just does it quietly. What we're talking about is active silence. The silence of someone who has assessed the situation, determined that a response is either unnecessary or undeserved, and chosen, deliberately, not to provide one. That silence is full. It's weighted. It communicates something specific. Your move didn't land the way you expected. There is something deeply unsettling about provoking someone and getting stillness in return. It disrupts the script. The provocateur expected a specific reaction. They wrote a part for you to play. and you didn't show up to play it. Now they're standing in a theater they built, alone on the stage, and the audience is watching them, not you. That reversal is not accidental. That is what controlled silence does to a room. There's a scene worth imagining clearly. Someone challenges you publicly, maybe questions your competence, maybe dismisses something you've worked on, maybe takes a shot at your credibility in front of people whose opinions you value. Every reflex in your nervous system fires at once. The heat moves up, the jaw tightens. The words are already forming, already halfway out. And you pause. One breath. Two. You look at them, not with anger, not with performance, just steadily, and you say nothing. Or if something is required, you say one sentence. Calm, clear, complete. Then you stop. You don't chase it with defense. You don't circle back later to make sure they understood. You let it sit. Watch what happens in that room. Watch where the weight shifts. Watch whose discomfort becomes visible. Watch who starts to look uncertain, and it won't be you. That's not a trick. That's not a tactic you're deploying. That's the natural result of what happens when someone with genuine internal stability is pushed and simply doesn't move. Practicing this requires one specific skill above all else: knowing your triggers before someone else finds them. Most people discover their triggers in real time, mid-conversation, mid-conflict, which is the worst possible moment to be learning new information about yourself. By then, the reaction is already happening. What you need is to map the terrain in advance. What topics make you defensive? What tones of voice instantly activate you? What type of person or what specific dynamic sends your nervous system into overdrive? Know this list, not to avoid those situations, but so that when you're in them, you have a fraction of a second of forewarning. That fraction of a second is everything. It's the difference between reacting from the brainstem and responding from choice. When you feel the heat rising, and you will, don't fight it. Don't perform calm over a storm that's actually raging underneath. Breathe into it. Let the physical sensation exist without immediately converting it to words. Most emotional reactions are looking for an exit route. Give them one that doesn't cost you your power. A breath, a pause, a moment of deliberate stillness. 9 times out of 10, by the time that moment passes, you'll realize the response they were waiting for isn't worth giving. There's another layer here that goes beyond the interpersonal. When you stop reacting emotionally, your words, the ones you do choose to speak, carry a completely different weight. Because people know you're selective. They know you don't throw words out carelessly to fill the heat of the moment. So when you do speak, they lean in. They treat what you say as considered rather than impulsive, as signal rather than noise. The irony is profound. By speaking less in moments of pressure, you become more heard. By refusing to fill every silence with defense, your presence in the silence becomes more powerful than anything you could have said. Dangerous confidence doesn't shout. It doesn't have to. It simply stands still while everything else moves, and lets that stillness speak for it. Chapter 4 took back the remote. This chapter cuts the cord. Because even without seeking approval, you can still be pulled, provoked into defending, reacting, proving. Approval-seeking and emotional reactivity are 2 different doors into the same trap. Close the first one, and someone will try the second. Now both are closed. Your internal state is no longer available for external manipulation through flattery or force. Which means the last unguarded frontier is the one no one talks about enough. The story your body is already telling. Long before the provocation, long before the silence, long before you've said a word or chosen not to. What is it saying right now? Chapter 6. The announcement you're already making. You haven't opened your mouth yet. You haven't said a word, made an argument, or introduced yourself. You've simply walked into the room. And the room has already formed an opinion. Not consciously, not with malice, just the way all humans process presence. In the first few seconds of seeing you, People are already running a rapid, largely unconscious assessment. Are you someone who belongs here or someone hoping not to be noticed? Are you steady or are you bracing? Are you taking up the space you're entitled to, or are you quietly apologizing for needing any at all? Your body answered before your brain had a chance to intervene. The question is what it said. Here's the hard truth about body language that nobody frames directly enough. You don't get to opt out of it. Silence is a choice. Explanation is a choice. Reaction is a choice, or at least it can become one. But your body is transmitting continuously, whether you're paying attention or not. The set of your shoulders, the steadiness of your gaze, the pace of your walk, the way you hold yourself when someone speaks to you. None of it is neutral. All of it is language. And in most interactions, it is the loudest thing you say. The problem is that most people's bodies have been running old programs for so long they've forgotten there was ever a choice. Shoulders pulled forward, a leftover from years of trying not to take up too much space. Eyes that drop when held, a reflex trained by environments that punished being fully seen. Movements that rush, that fidget, that scatter, the physical expression of a nervous system that never fully believes it's allowed to be still. You don't notice these things, but everyone else does. Think about the people whose presence you felt before they reached you. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't perform. They simply moved through space as if the space was theirs to move through, not aggressively, not with arrogance, but with a kind of quiet permission that they apparently gave themselves long ago. They stood where they stood without hedging it. They made eye contact without making it a challenge. When they spoke, they didn't rush the words out as if worried the opportunity might close. That quality, that specific, recognizable quality, is not charisma. It's not a gift some people are born with. It's the physical expression of an internal state. It's what the body does when it's no longer running the "I might not belong here" program. It's what presence looks like when the person inside has stopped apologizing for taking up room. You've been around people like this. You know the feeling of being in their orbit. Now understand, that feeling is buildable, not by performing it, by earning it from the inside out, which is what the last 5 chapters have been doing, and then letting the body finally reflect what the interior already knows. The body and the mind are not separate systems issuing independent reports. They're in constant conversation, and crucially, it runs both directions. Most people know that mental state affects physical posture. When you feel defeated, you slump. When you feel afraid, you contract. When you feel uncertain, your eyes move. This direction of influence is intuitive. What fewer people use is the reverse. Physical posture affects mental state. Deliberately, measurably. When you sit collapsed, your brain receives a signal. This person is under threat. Conserve energy, stay small. When you sit upright, shoulders open, feet planted, the signal changes. This person is stable, capable, present. Your nervous system is not just reporting on your confidence. It's partly constructing it, in real time, based on the data your body provides. This means you don't have to wait until you feel confident to carry yourself confidently. You carry yourself confidently and let the feeling follow. Not as performance, as input. You're feeding the system different data and waiting for the output to shift. It does shift, faster than you'd expect. Here's a practical architecture for the physical presence of dangerous confidence. Not a list of tricks, a set of principles that, practiced consistently, rewire the defaults. Walk as if you've already decided where you're going. Not quickly, with intention. Speed signals anxiety. Deliberate pace signals certainty. When you enter a room, resist the reflex to immediately look for where you're supposed to be, as if apologizing in advance for needing a place. Pause. Breathe. Orient yourself at your own pace. That single extra second communicates that you are not rushed by this environment. Stand with your feet actually planted. Most people who are physically insecure stand with their weight slightly shifted, ready to move, ready to adjust. the physical version of keeping one foot near the exit. Plant both feet. Own the square foot of ground you're standing on. It's yours. Make eye contact and hold it one beat longer than feels comfortable. Not aggressively, steadily. The instinct to break eye contact early is the instinct to reduce your own visibility, to make yourself less exposed. Train yourself out of it. Looking someone in the eye without flinching says, without a single word, "I'm comfortable being seen." That is confidence in its most distilled physical form. Slow your hands. Nervous energy exits through the extremities, fidgeting, adjusting, touching the face, moving objects that don't need moving. Every one of these gestures is a broadcast. Still hands communicate a still mind. You don't need to be rigid, just deliberate. There's a specific moment this all becomes critical, and it's not the big presentation or the high-stakes negotiation. It's the ordinary Tuesday, the unremarkable hallway, the meeting that doesn't matter much, the conversation with someone who probably isn't even paying close attention. Because here's what shapes physical presence in the moments that do matter: how you carry yourself in the moments that don't. Confidence in the body is not a costume you put on for important occasions. It's a default you build through repetition in the mundane ones. Every time you catch yourself shrinking in an ordinary moment and choose to straighten instead, that's a rep. Every time you hold your gaze a second longer in a casual conversation, that's a rep. The body learns through repetition, not intention. You don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your defaults. Make the default strong. By now, 6 chapters in, something important has been built. The voice inside your head is no longer running on autopilot. Your self-respect is being practiced rather than wished for. The approval mechanism has been identified and is being systematically starved. Emotional reactivity has been replaced, or is being replaced, with deliberate stillness. And now the body, which was silently undermining all of that work with its old programs, has been given new instructions. The interior and the exterior are starting to align. When they do, something happens that no single chapter could manufacture on its own: presence. Not performed, not projected, simply there. Unmistakable. The kind that makes people pay attention without knowing exactly why. But presence without direction is just atmosphere. The question that comes next is harder and less comfortable than anything so far. Who is actually running this thing? You or the circumstances you keep reacting to? Chapter 7. From passenger to driver. You've been in reaction mode longer than you realize. Not occasionally, structurally. The alarm goes off and you respond to it. The email arrives and you respond to it. The mood in the room shifts and you respond to it. Someone pushes and you push back, or fold, or scramble to accommodate. The day arrives and you react to whatever it brings, and you call that living. But there's a word for someone whose entire existence is structured around responding to external inputs. Passenger. Not in the romantic sense. In the precise sense. Someone in the passenger seat does not decide the speed, the route, or the destination. They experience the journey, sometimes pleasantly, sometimes not, but they do not direct it. They arrive wherever the driver decided to go. And if you've spent your life responding to what the world throws at you rather than deciding in advance what you're going to create, that's the seat you've been in. Comfortable enough, perhaps, but not yours. Here's what reaction mode actually costs you that comfort obscures. When you react, you are always operating on someone else's timeline. They set the event, you provide the response. They determine the terms of the exchange, and you play within them. Even when you react well, even when your response is smart, controlled, effective, you are still fundamentally playing defense. Defense can prevent you from losing. It cannot make you win. And here's the part that stings. When you're permanently reactive, people learn the pattern. They figure out your responses before you give them. They know that if they apply this kind of pressure, you'll behave this way. If they withdraw this thing, you'll do that. If they praise here, you'll soften there. You think you're navigating the situation. They're navigating you. That's not paranoia. That's just what happens when you have no decided center of your own. Nature abhors a vacuum. If you don't fill your own interior with intentional direction, other people's agendas fill it for you. Quietly, gradually, until the life you're living feels vaguely like yours but fits just slightly wrong, because it was mostly shaped by accommodation. Leading yourself doesn't require a title, an audience, or anyone's permission. Let's be precise about what it actually means. It means deciding, in advance, not in response, what you're going to bring to a situation. Before the meeting, not during it. Before the conversation, not after you've already been pulled off balance. You choose the emotional tone you're going to operate from, the outcome you're working toward, the standard you're going to hold regardless of what the room does. That preparation is not rigidity. It's orientation. The difference between someone who knows which direction they're pointed and someone who spins to face wherever the last voice came from. A simple example. You're walking into a conversation you know is going to be tense. The reactive approach: show up, see how it goes, respond to whatever happens. The leadership approach: decide before you walk in. I'm going to stay calm. I'm going to speak clearly and briefly. I'm not going to be pulled into their emotional register. I know what outcome I want from this conversation, and I'm going to work toward it. Same conversation, different person entering it. The second person is not controlling the other party. They're controlling themselves completely. And that control over self is the only kind of control that actually matters, because it's the only kind no external force can revoke. There's a distinction worth cutting clearly here, because it gets muddied constantly. Leading yourself is not about never being affected by things. It's not emotional anesthesia, and it's not the performance of indifference. You can be moved without being swept away. You can care about an outcome without being destroyed if it goes wrong. You can feel the heat of a difficult moment without letting it drive the car. The reactive person and the self-leading person often feel the same things. The difference is what they do with what they feel. The reactive person converts feeling directly into behavior. I feel threatened, therefore I attack. I feel anxious, therefore I over-explain. I feel overlooked, therefore I perform. The self-leading person feels the same thing and inserts a step. I feel threatened. Now what do I want to do with that? That inserted step is not a pause. It's a decision point. And it is, in practice, the difference between being led by your emotions and leading with them. Think about the relationships in your life, professional, personal, whichever carries the most friction. Now think about the emotional rhythm of those relationships. Who sets the tone? When one person is having a bad day, whose mood absorbs it? When tension rises, who escalates and who stays level? If you're honest, you'll likely find that you've been more follower than setter in more of those dynamics than is comfortable to admit. Not because you're weak, because you were reactive, because you were waiting to see what the temperature was before deciding what temperature you'd be. The person who leads the emotional register of a relationship doesn't do it through force or volume. They do it through stability. When you remain steady in the face of someone else's fluctuation, one of two things happens. They stabilize toward your level, or they expose the extent of their instability while you remain untouched by it. Either outcome leaves you in a stronger position. This is not manipulation. This is simply what happens when someone has a genuine center of gravity. Other things orbit it, not because they were commanded to, because gravity is just what stability does. Here's the practical shift, broken into its components. Before situations, set intentions. Not goals for the other person's behavior, intentions for your own. I will remain calm. I will speak with clarity. I will not take the bait if the bait is offered. This takes 30 seconds and changes everything about how you enter. During situations, slow the gap between stimulus and response. Not artificially, genuinely. When you feel the pull to react, let one breath happen first. That breath is the moment you step from passenger to driver. It's small. It's everything. After situations, assess based on your own standard, not the other person's reaction. Did you stay oriented toward what you intended? Did you lead yourself well, regardless of how they behaved? Your metric is internal. It has to be. If your metric is how they responded, you're still in their hands. 6 chapters built the interior. The voice, the respect, the freedom from approval, the emotional stillness, the physical presence. Everything up to this point was construction. This chapter is where you take the wheel. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a declaration. Just, quietly, deliberately, without asking for anyone's permission. You stop waiting for the world to set your direction and you start setting it yourself. And once you've decided you're the driver, the road ahead stops feeling like something that happens to you. It starts feeling like something you're building as you go. But here's what driving requires that nobody warns you about. The road ahead is not smooth. It's uncomfortable, relentlessly, necessarily, productively uncomfortable. And most people, even people who've done everything in the last 6 chapters, still flinch when they hit that part. What do you do when you do? Chapter 8. The gym you've been avoiding. You already know what it feels like. That specific resistance that rises the moment something asks more of you than you're currently comfortable giving. The friction before the difficult conversation. The weight in your chest before the unfamiliar room. The moment just before you raise your hand, send the message, take the leap, where every cell in your body conspires to produce one coherent message. Don't. Most people obey that message. They call it intuition. They call it not being ready. They call it waiting for the right moment, the right preparation, the right conditions. But if you're honest, and this book has been asking you to be honest from the first page, you know the difference between genuine unreadiness and fear wearing a reasonable disguise. The right conditions are not coming. Comfort doesn't build anything. And the version of you that keeps waiting is not being patient. It's being kept. Here's the principle underneath everything this chapter is about, stated plainly. Confidence is not a feeling you develop and then use. It's evidence you collect by doing things before you feel ready, and then looking back at the fact that you survived them. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. Everything else is decoration. The people you watch who carry themselves with genuine, unshakable certainty, not performance, not bravado, the real thing, are not confident because they were born that way, or because they had better circumstances, or because life was easier on them. They're confident because they have a longer record of walking into discomfort and coming out the other side. They've accumulated proof, not from anyone else, from themselves, about themselves. And that proof, built over time in uncomfortable places, becomes something no external opinion can easily overwrite. You can't argue someone out of evidence they personally collected. The gym is the cleanest analogy for this because it makes visible what's usually invisible. Nobody walks into a gym on day 1 and lifts the heavy weight. Nobody expects to. You start where you are. You add resistance gradually. Your muscles, under strain, not under comfort, grow to meet the demand. The soreness is not damage. It's adaptation in progress. And the weight that made you shake on month 1 becomes the warm-up by month 6. Not because it got lighter, but because you got stronger. Your emotional and psychological architecture works by exactly the same principle. The situation that shakes you today, the difficult conversation, the public exposure, the risk of failure, the room full of people you'd rather impress, is weight on the bar. Avoid it, and you stay exactly as strong as you currently are. Engage it, survive it, walk away from it intact, and you've just run a rep that your nervous system logged permanently. What once felt impossible becomes routine. That's not metaphor. That's neurology. The brain genuinely rewires in response to repeated exposure. Fear responses diminish. Capacity expands. What used to trigger the full alarm now barely registers. Not because you've suppressed it, but because you've trained it out of its outsized power. The mistake most people make is waiting for the fear to subside before they act. They're waiting for the green light from their nervous system that never comes, because the nervous system does not issue green lights for unfamiliar territory. Its job is to flag novelty as potential danger. It will always flag it. You are not waiting for a signal that exists. You are waiting for a feeling that the action itself has to produce. The courage is not what you feel before you step forward. The courage is the step taken despite what you feel. Repeat that enough times, and something changes that cannot be undone. You start carrying a different relationship to fear itself. Not fearlessness. That's a myth sold by people who've never been genuinely tested. Something more useful than fearlessness. The bone-deep knowledge that fear does not mean stop. It means you're at the edge of something worth crossing. There is a specific flavor of discomfort worth singling out because it's the one most people avoid most expensively. The discomfort of being seen before you're ready. Speaking before the thought is fully formed. Showing the work before it's perfect. Raising the hand without knowing if you'll be called on and embarrassed. Entering the room before you've figured out whether you're allowed to be impressive in it. This particular discomfort, the exposure of being in progress, visibly, in front of other people, is what keeps more potential locked down than perhaps any other single thing. Because the alternative, waiting until you're ready, until it's polished, until you're certain, is a strategy that sounds responsible and functions as paralysis. Nobody who ever built anything of consequence waited until they were ready. They started unready, visibly, uncomfortably, and became ready through the doing. Being seen mid-process is not a vulnerability. It's a statement. I am not waiting for your permission to begin. So how do you build the practice? Start smaller than feels significant. This is not permission to stay small, it's strategy. The brain needs early wins to build the association between discomfort and survivability. Speak up once in the meeting where you'd usually stay quiet. Introduce yourself to one person in the room you'd usually avoid. Send the message you've been drafting for 3 days. These are not dramatic acts. They are reps, and reps compound. Then go bigger. Deliberately take on one thing per month that genuinely intimidates you. Not something designed to break you. Something designed to stretch you past your current ceiling. The goal is not success. The goal is exposure. Even failure in a stretch situation builds more than success in a comfortable one, because failure in a stretch situation teaches you the most important thing your nervous system needs to learn. That was survivable, and I'm still here. The gym doesn't care whether you lifted it smoothly or whether you struggled. The rep counts either way. 7 chapters have given you the architecture, the inner voice, the self-respect, the freedom from approval, the stillness under provocation, the physical presence, the decision to lead yourself. Every one of those things was a form of preparation. This chapter is where preparation ends and the work actually begins. Because none of it matters, not the thermostat, not the body language, not the remote you took back. If you don't take what was built in the comfortable space of reading and walk it into the uncomfortable space of living. The gym you've been avoiding is not a specific place. It's any moment that asks more of you than you currently think you can give. It's been waiting for you with patient, complete indifference to your schedule. You've been strong enough to enter it for longer than you've admitted. And once you step in, once you start collecting the evidence of your own capability rather than waiting for someone to hand you a permission slip, you'll discover something that makes the discomfort retroactively worth every rep. You'll discover that you have far more to say than you've been letting yourself say. So why are you still using so many words to say it? Chapter 9. Why the loudest person loses. Watch the room at its most charged moment. A debate, a negotiation, a table where something real is at stake, and find the person talking most. That person is losing. Not the argument, necessarily. Not the room's affection. But something more important than both, their own authority. Because volume, in the absence of weight, is just noise. And the room knows the difference between someone speaking because they have something to say and someone speaking because the silence makes them nervous. Most people talk too much, not because they're arrogant, because they're afraid. Afraid that if they stop, they'll become forgettable. Afraid that attention is like a flame that goes out the moment you stop feeding it. Afraid that the pause will be read as uncertainty, as weakness, as having run out of things worth hearing. So they keep going. They fill. They pile explanation on top of statement on top of qualification, and somewhere in all of that, somewhere between the third unnecessary sentence and the fifth, the weight drains out of everything they've said. You've watched this happen to other people. You've done it yourself. The moment you kept talking past the point where you should have stopped and felt the room slip slightly and talked faster to try to get it back. That feeling is not imagined. That's the room telling you something. Here is the mechanics of why less commands more, stated without decoration. When you speak constantly, you become predictable. People learn your rhythm. They learn when to tune in and when to wait for the part that matters. And eventually, when there's no reliable signal for when that part is coming, they stop distinguishing. Everything you say gets the same low-level attention because you haven't created any scarcity. When you speak selectively, you create a different relationship between your words and the room. People don't know when you'll speak next. They don't know what form it will take. So when you do open your mouth, there's an involuntary attention, a collective lean, that the high-volume speaker never gets, no matter how loud. Not because you demanded it, because you created the conditions for it by not demanding anything. This is how genuine authority works in speech. Not by taking up more sonic space, by making the space you do take up mean something. There's a man, a negotiator, spent decades in rooms where the numbers had too many zeros for most people to think clearly. He had one rule he applied without exception in any high-stakes conversation. He never spoke before the other person had finished, fully finished, including the trailing thoughts most people cut off. He never filled silence with sound just because it was there, and he never made his most important point more than once. His reasoning was precise. Every unnecessary word is a tell. It tells them you need something from this conversation. The moment they know you need something, they have leverage. Silence, in his framework, was not absence. It was information management. It communicated that he was not hungry, not anxious, not in need of their approval or their agreement. He could sit in the quiet of an unsettled room and wait, genuinely wait, without performing patience, until the other side filled the silence themselves. And they always did. People cannot tolerate silence in a negotiation. They fill it, and in filling it, they frequently give away everything that matters. He won more rooms with stillness than most people win with argument. Chapter 1 was about stopping the over-explanation that bleeds authority in conversation. This chapter is the deeper version of that same principle. Because Chapter 1 addressed the habitual explainer, the person who justifies, qualifies, and cushions every statement until it no longer has edges. This chapter addresses the person who has stopped over-explaining but still speaks too much, still fills pauses, still demonstrates their value through output rather than presence, still, in some fundamental way, believes that being heard requires being constant. It doesn't. It requires being worth listening to. And the fastest way to become worth listening to is to stop being audible when you have nothing to say. These are not the same threshold, and confusing them is expensive. Here is what listening actually does. And this is the part that changes how you operate in every room you'll ever enter. Most people listen to reply. They're tracking the conversation just enough to find their opening, to locate the moment where they can insert what they already decided they were going to say before the other person finished. This is not listening. This is waiting with your mouth closed. Genuine listening, the kind that is itself an act of confidence, because it requires you to have no anxious agenda, does something entirely different. It gives you information. Real information, what this person actually believes, what they're afraid of, what they want that they're not directly saying, where the gaps are between their stated position and their actual one. When you listen that carefully, when you speak as rarely as is genuinely warranted, your responses stop being prepared statements and start being precise instruments. You stop speaking to demonstrate that you belong in the room. You speak to move something in the room. And that shift, from demonstration to function, is one of the clearest external markers of someone who has genuinely internalized everything this book has been building. The other gift of economy in speech, you stop revealing what doesn't need to be revealed. When you talk at length, you give away more than information. You give away your anxieties, your blind spots, your need to be right, your hunger for validation. All the interior workings that a skilled observer reads not from what you say, but from how much you say and when. The person who overtalks in a tense situation is telling you, involuntarily, this situation has me. The person who sits quietly, responds briefly, and holds themselves steady through the silence is telling you something else entirely. Speak less, and you become less readable. Not less authentic, less exploitable. There's a meaningful difference. By this point in the book, the pattern is clear enough to name directly. Every chapter has been about the same thing, approached from a different angle. Stop handing yourself away. Stop explaining yourself away, talking yourself away, performing yourself away, reacting yourself away. Stop giving the room more access to your interior than the room has earned. This chapter is the linguistic version of that principle. Your words are not currency you spend to buy acceptance. They are a signal whose value is determined entirely by its scarcity and its precision. Treat them that way. The person in the room who speaks least but means every word, who pauses without apology, who answers without over-answering, who lets a silence exist without rushing to fill it. That person is not quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they know something the loud ones haven't figured out yet. The room belongs to whoever needs it least. And the person who needs it least is already preparing for the one thing no amount of silence can protect you from. The moment the world looks you in the eye and says no. What do you do then? Chapter 10. No is a whetstone, not a wall. The rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic about the day, no weather to match the mood, no cinematic timing. Just an email, 3 sentences, and a door that closed without ceremony. Most people treat that moment as information about themselves. They fold it into the running narrative. See, I knew it, not good enough, should have known better. And the rejection doesn't just close a door. It closes something internal. A willingness, a reach, a readiness to try something that might not work. And the next attempt, if it comes at all, comes smaller, more hedged, pre-defeated. That's not what rejection is for. That's what happens when you don't know how to use it. Rejection stings because it touches pride. This is not a weakness to be fixed. It's a signal to be read correctly. The sting means you cared. The sting means you put something real forward and the world didn't immediately confirm it. That's not evidence of a mistake. That's evidence of genuine attempt. And genuine attempt, real reach, real risk, real skin in the game, is the only soil in which dangerous confidence actually grows. You cannot build the real thing inside a life where everything goes smoothly. Smooth lives produce smooth people, pleasant, easy, fundamentally untested. The kind of confidence built there is like a muscle developed only on the machines, never under actual load. It looks functional until the moment it needs to perform under real conditions. Then it reveals itself. Then everyone in the room, including you, sees that it was always decoration. The people whose confidence you actually respect, not admire from a distance, but respect, feel in your bones as legitimate, earned it in the difficult places, in the rejection, in the failure, in the moment where the world said not yet, or not you, or not this, and they kept moving anyway. Not out of denial, out of a relationship with no that most people never develop. Here's what rejection actually is, stripped of the story you've been telling about it. It's calibration data. A no to your idea is information about fit, timing, presentation, audience, approach. Sometimes all of these simultaneously, rarely about fundamental worth. A no to your request tells you something about the person who delivered it, the context you're operating in, the gap between what you offered and what was needed. A no to your effort means the effort needs refining, redirecting, or redeploying somewhere it's better suited. None of these things are verdicts on your value as a person. They're feedback on a specific attempt in a specific context at a specific moment. The moment you conflate the two, the moment my idea was rejected becomes I am rejectable, you've made a category error that costs you enormously. Because now every rejection carries weight it was never meant to carry. Every no becomes existential. Every closed door becomes evidence for the prosecution in a case that was never actually being tried. Separate the attempt from the person making it. Completely. Not as comfort, as accuracy. Think about the pattern across virtually every person who built something that lasted. The manuscript rejected by 26 publishers before it became one of the most read books of its generation. The athlete cut from the varsity team who became the defining player of his era. The entrepreneur whose first 3 companies failed publicly before the 4th one changed the industry. These are not exceptional cases used as inspiration to make you feel better. These are the standard pattern. Rejection is not the exception on the path to something real. It's a consistent feature of it. If you're not being rejected regularly, you're not aiming at the right targets. You're operating inside the safe perimeter, the zone where you already know you're likely to be accepted, already know the outcome roughly in advance, already know you won't be too exposed if it goes wrong. That perimeter feels like prudence. It is, in practice, a cage with the door left open. Not being told no means you're not asking for enough. You're not putting forward things that genuinely stretch what you're capable of. You're not in the rooms where the outcomes matter. If every door you approach opens easily, you are not pushing on the right doors. There's a specific practice that transforms the relationship with rejection, not conceptually, but operationally. Stop treating rejection as something to recover from. Start treating it as something to extract from. After every significant no, ask 3 questions. Not in bitterness, not in obsessive self-analysis, with the detached curiosity of an engineer reviewing a test result. First, what specifically didn't land, and is that something I can address? Second, was this the right context for what I was offering, or was the mismatch environmental rather than qualitative? Third, what does this tell me about where I should be directing this energy instead? Most people skip this entirely. They either spiral into the wound or they shake it off without examining what it contained. Both responses waste the rejection. The spiral costs you energy and confidence. The pure shake-off costs you information. The extraction, the disciplined, unemotional mining of what the no actually tells you, turns every rejection into forward intelligence. You lose nothing except the outcome you wanted. You gain data, resilience, and the specific kind of toughness that can only be built by staying in the game after the game has been unkind to you. Here's the reframe that makes all of this structural rather than motivational. Every rejection is a filter. It is removing something, a path, a person, a context, an approach that was not right for where you're actually going. You don't always know where you're going clearly enough to see what's being removed and why. But the filter is working regardless of your visibility into it. The door that closed was not your door. The yes that didn't come was not your yes. This is not comfort. This is geometry. The path to anything worth having is lined with closed doors, and every one of them redirected you. Sometimes towards something better, sometimes toward a harder version of the same destination that will mean more when you reach it. Rejection is not the opposite of progress. It's frequently the mechanism of it. The person who internalizes this, not as a phrase to repeat, but as a genuine operating principle. Stops being afraid of no. Not because no stops hurting, but because the hurt stops meaning what it used to mean. It becomes signal rather than verdict, input rather than conclusion. And once rejection loses its power to conclude things about you, something extraordinary happens to your willingness to attempt. You stop calculating whether you can survive the no before you try. You try, because the no, if it comes, is just the next piece of information on the way to the right yes. 9 chapters built an interior that the world cannot easily shake. The voice, the respect, the freedom, the stillness, the presence, the direction, the capacity for discomfort, the authority of economy. Everything assembled so that when the world delivers its verdict, and it will, regularly, without apology, you have something underneath you that the verdict cannot reach. This chapter is where that foundation meets its first real test. Not the theoretical test of imagining rejection, the actual test of receiving it, standing in it, extracting from it, and moving forward not despite it, but partially because of it. Because here's the thing about people who have truly learned to use rejection as fuel rather than flinch from it as threat. They develop an appetite that can't be manufactured any other way. They start moving toward difficulty instead of away from it. They stop pre-calculating whether the outcome will be comfortable and start asking whether the attempt will be worth making. That appetite, once developed, is almost impossible to stop. But even with all of this, the stillness, the self-direction, the ability to absorb and use rejection, there's one more attachment that keeps people fragile in ways they don't see coming. The attachment to how things have to turn out. What happens when you finally let go of that? Chapter 11. Let go of the rope. There's a particular kind of suffering that has nothing to do with what's actually happening and everything to do with how tightly you're holding on to how it's supposed to go. You've done the work. You prepared. You showed up correctly, spoke well, stayed calm, took the risk, and now you're waiting. And the waiting is eating you alive. Not because the outcome is certain to be bad, but because you need it to go a specific way so badly that the need itself has become its own kind of cage. You're performing the right behaviors on the outside and internally white-knuckling an outcome you cannot control. That grip is costing you more than the outcome ever could. Outcome dependency is insidious because it disguises itself as care, as investment, as giving something everything you have. And those things are real. You should care, you should be invested, you should bring everything you've got. But there's a line between bringing your full effort to something and tethering your internal stability to how it resolves. Cross that line, and you've handed the remote control of your well-being to something that isn't in your hands. The result, the reaction, the response, these are not yours to control. And when you need them to go a certain way in order to feel okay, you've made your peace of mind conditional on variables that will frequently disappoint you. That is not commitment. That is anxiety with a work ethic. Watch what outcome dependency does to performance, specifically to the performance of people who are otherwise prepared and capable. The job interview where the candidate needed it so badly that the need itself was visible. The pitch where the founder's hunger for the yes was louder than the idea. The conversation where someone wanted the other person to respond a certain way so desperately that they shaped everything they said around engineering that response. And in doing so, stopped being genuine, stopped being present, stopped being the version of themselves that was actually worth responding to. Outcome dependency creates a feedback loop that degrades the very performance it's trying to protect. You need the outcome. The need makes you perform instead of be. The performance is less compelling than authenticity. The outcome becomes less likely. The need intensifies. The grip tightens. The results loosen. And you can't see why because you're trying so hard. The counterintuitive truth, and this one genuinely requires sitting with, is that detachment from outcomes is not indifference to them. This distinction is not semantic. It's the entire thing. Indifference means you don't care how it goes. Detachment means you've done everything in your power and released the result from your hands without releasing it from your effort. You worked fully, showed up completely, brought everything available to you, and then you let it go. Not because it doesn't matter, because you understand clearly what is and isn't in your control, and you've stopped suffering over the boundary between those two things. This is an ancient idea dressed in practical clothes. What is yours? The preparation, the attempt, the quality of your presence and your effort. What is not yours? The verdict. Fight to control what's yours completely. Release what isn't completely. The suffering lives entirely in the confusion between the two. There's a specific type of person this chapter is really aimed at, and you probably recognize them. They do everything right. They're disciplined, prepared, intelligent, capable. They've read the books, done the work, put in the hours. And they're still not free, because underneath all of that competence runs a current of need. Need for the thing to work. Need for the effort to be recognized. Need for the outcome to justify the investment. They've built an impressive exterior, and inside it they're still negotiating desperately with results they can't dictate. The work in this chapter is not about doing less or caring less. It's about completing the transaction with yourself before the external result comes in. Meaning, you decide in advance that you are okay, not because it will go well, but because you showed up fully. The outcome confirms nothing about your worth because your worth was already decided before you walked in. That's not a trick. That's the completion of everything built in the chapters before this one. The inner voice, the self-respect, the freedom from approval, the stillness under pressure, all of it was leading here. To a person whose internal state is not a function of external results. Here's a practice that sounds smaller than it is. Before any situation where you notice the grip, the outcome dependency tightening, ask yourself one question only. Have I done everything available to me? If the answer is no, do the thing you haven't done. If the answer is yes, then your job is finished. What comes next is not your department. File the result under information received and redirect your energy to the next thing you can actually affect. This is not resignation. Resigned people stop trying. This is completion. Completed people try fully and then release fully, and they're ready to try again faster, with less scar tissue from the last attempt, because they didn't fuse their identity to the outcome. The person who can do that, who can work at full capacity and hold results at arm's length, is genuinely dangerous. Not because they don't care, because they can't be broken by disappointment. You can't leverage someone's outcomes against them if they've already let go of the rope. And here's what letting go of the rope actually feels like, once you've practiced it enough to know. It feels like space. Not emptiness, space. The kind of interior room that opens up when you stop filling it with what if it doesn't work, and what will they think, and what does it mean if it goes wrong. That room, once cleared, doesn't stay empty. It fills with something more useful. Clarity about the next move, presence in the current moment, genuine availability to whatever the situation actually requires rather than the performance your anxiety was scripting. That clarity, that presence, is what makes the difference between someone who's capable and someone who's effective. Capability is about what you have. Effectiveness is about how fully you can deploy it. And you cannot deploy what you're too tightly wound to release. 10 chapters built the person. This chapter finishes the interior architecture with the keystone, freedom from results. Not because results don't matter, because you've stopped making them the condition for your stability. The foundation holds regardless of whether the building gets applause. The work is done because it's worth doing. The attempt is made because it's worth making. The reach extends because that's what reaching is for, not because extension is guaranteed to land. You've built something that doesn't need external confirmation to remain standing. Which means the only remaining question is how it holds when everything outside of you goes wrong at once. When it's not one rejection, one difficult conversation, one unsatisfying outcome, but everything, simultaneously testing whether the thing you built is real. What do you do when the noise is no longer occasional? What do you do when it's all you can hear? Chapter 12. No is a complete sentence. Somewhere along the way, you learned that a boundary without an explanation isn't really a boundary. That saying no without a reason attached is rude, cold, aggressive, that it requires justification to be legitimate. That the other person's comfort with your refusal is part of your responsibility. It isn't. And that belief has been costing you in ways that compound quietly until one day you look up and realize you're living a life shaped almost entirely by what you couldn't bring yourself to decline. A boundary is not a negotiating position. It's not an opening bid in a conversation about what you'll tolerate. It's not an emotional wall erected out of damage or fear. A boundary, properly understood, is simply the external expression of internal values, the point where what you're willing to engage with ends and what you aren't begins. It's information about who you are, and information doesn't require an apology. The reason most people struggle to hold boundaries isn't that they don't have them. They have them. They feel them acutely. The slow drain of a relationship that takes more than it gives. The mounting resentment of commitments made from obligation rather than choice. The specific exhaustion of people who spend their lives being available to everyone except themselves. The sensation of a crossed boundary is unmistakable. The problem is what happens next. The feeling arrives and immediately gets interrogated. Am I being too sensitive? Is this worth the conflict? What will they think of me if I say something? Maybe I'm overreacting. And by the time that interrogation concludes, usually in favor of swallowing it, the moment has passed, the boundary has been crossed unchallenged, and one more layer of quiet resentment has been added to the interior. Here's what consistently failing to hold your own boundaries actually does, not to your relationships, but to you. Every time you override what you know is your limit to accommodate someone else's comfort, you send a message to yourself. Not consciously, but structurally. The message is, my experience is negotiable. My capacity is available on demand. What I need is less important than what they want. Say that to yourself enough times in enough situations, and you build a foundational belief, not held in words, held in behavior, that you don't entirely matter. Chapter 3 built self-respect. This chapter is where self-respect has to perform under social pressure. Because it's easy to respect yourself in the abstract, in the quiet of your own company. It's considerably harder to hold that respect intact when a specific person, someone you care about, someone you work with, someone whose opinion still has some residual pull, is visibly unhappy with where you've drawn the line. That's the actual test. Not whether you know your values. Whether you'll hold them when holding them costs something. The architecture of a boundary that holds has 3 components, and most people get 1 or 2 while missing the third. The first is clarity. You have to know what you're actually protecting. Not a vague sense of discomfort. A specific understanding of what value is being violated and why it matters. Vague discomfort produces vague boundaries that wobble under the slightest pressure. Specific clarity produces a line you can hold because you know exactly what's behind it. The second is communication. Delivered once, directly, without lengthy preamble. Not "I'm sorry, I hope this doesn't upset you. I know it might seem strange, but I was thinking maybe possibly." Just the thing itself. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. I won't be doing that. Short, clear, complete. The explanation they're waiting for after that sentence is not something you owe them. If context serves the relationship, offer it. If it's just a bid to make them comfortable with your refusal, let the silence hold. The third component is the one most people drop: consistency. A boundary stated once and then abandoned under pressure isn't a boundary. It's a preference with a short lifespan. And here's the brutal truth. When you state a boundary and then retreat from it because someone reacts badly, you haven't just failed to hold the line. You've taught them precisely how much pressure it takes to make the line move. and they will use that information. What happens when you hold a boundary and the other person doesn't like it? Genuinely, vocally, with force. First, understand the geometry of that moment. Their reaction to your boundary is not your responsibility to manage, not your problem to solve, not evidence that your boundary was wrong. It's information about them, about how accustomed they've become to your compliance, about the gap between what they expected from you and who you're becoming. That gap will create friction. The friction is not a sign you've done something wrong. It's a sign something is changing. Some people will adjust. They'll recalibrate, respect the line, and the relationship will find a new equilibrium that's actually healthier than the one it replaced, because it's now built on honesty rather than one person's constant accommodation. Others won't adjust. They'll push harder, withdraw, escalate, appeal to guilt, reframe your boundary as selfishness or aggression. These responses are revealing. The person who cannot respect a reasonable limit you've placed on your own life is telling you something important about whether they were ever actually interested in your well-being or only in your availability. The boundary didn't damage the relationship. It revealed what the relationship was already built on. There's a version of boundary setting that this chapter is not describing, and it's worth naming clearly to prevent the misread. This is not about building walls, not about withdrawing from intimacy, preemptively protecting yourself from connection, or turning every relationship into a negotiated transaction. Genuine intimacy requires openness, and openness requires some degree of vulnerability, which is, by definition, the willingness to be affected by another person. Boundaries and openness are not opposites. In fact, the people who have the clearest, most consistently held boundaries are frequently the most genuinely open, because they're not spending all of their relational energy defending against slow encroachment. They know where the edges are. Inside those edges, they're fully present, fully available, fully there. The boundaries don't reduce the intimacy. They make it safe enough to actually exist. 11 chapters in, the pattern is complete enough to see whole. You stopped explaining yourself. You took back the internal voice. You built self-respect through action. You killed the need for approval. You learned to stay still under provocation. You let your body speak correctly. You stopped reacting and started leading. You walked into discomfort deliberately. You stopped filling silence with noise. You learned to use rejection as fuel. You let go of the outcome. And now this, you hold the line. Not because you're rigid, because you know what you're made of, and you've decided it's worth protecting. The person who can do all of that, who has done all of that, is someone the world will occasionally try to break. Not maliciously, just because the world tests things. It pushes on structures to see what holds. What does this structure do when everything pushes at once? When it's not one difficult person or one bad outcome or one moment of pressure, but sustained, simultaneous, chaotic pressure from multiple directions. What does the interior look like when the exterior is genuinely on fire? Chapter 13. The eye of the storm lives in you. Everything is wrong at the same time. Not the manageable kind of wrong, where one thing breaks and you fix it and move on. The other kind, where the professional situation is unraveling, the personal situation is demanding, the financial pressure is real, the conversation you need to have hasn't happened yet, and somewhere underneath all of it is the low, persistent hum of I don't know if I can hold all of this together. The kind of wrong that doesn't come with a clear action item. The kind that just sits there, heavy and simultaneous, waiting to see what you're made of. This is the chapter that was always going to come. Every chapter before it was preparation for this one. Here's the first thing to understand about chaos. It doesn't actually care about you. Not personally, not specifically. It isn't targeting your weaknesses or timing itself for your most vulnerable moments, though it will feel that way with remarkable consistency. Chaos is simply the natural state of complex systems under pressure, and you are embedded in several complex systems simultaneously. Things will go wrong at the same time because that's what things do. The question was never whether this would happen. The question was always who you'd be when it did. Most people have a chaos response that kicks in automatically and serves them poorly. The response is some variation of acceleration. Move faster, react more, control more, fix everything simultaneously, fill every available moment with urgent action to outrun the feeling of things being out of control. This feels productive. It is, in practice, the opposite. Accelerated reactivity in a chaotic situation amplifies the chaos. You start making decisions from anxiety rather than clarity. You start confusing motion with progress. You burn enormous energy on problems that would have resolved themselves if you'd had the patience to let them, and you neglect the ones that actually required your attention. The first casualty of chaos, for most people, is discernment. The ability to tell what actually requires action from what just feels urgent. Panic cannot make that distinction. Calm can. Calm is not a personality trait. This matters because most people write it off as temperament, something some people have and others don't, allocated at birth with eye color and bone structure. That's convenient. It's also wrong. Calm is a trained response. It's the product of repeated exposure to discomfort, which Chapter 8 addressed, combined with the practiced ability to locate your center when things move violently around it. It's a skill. Skills are built. And like every other skill in this book, it's built not in the calm moments, but specifically in the difficult ones. Think of it this way. The eye of a storm is not calm because nothing is happening near it. It's calm because of the specific physics of how pressure organizes itself around a center. The violence is real. The chaos is real. The eye exists anyway, not despite the storm, but as a function of it. You are capable of being that center. Not because nothing is affecting you, because you've built something internal that the external turbulence organizes around rather than destroys. What does this actually look like when the situation is genuinely hard? It doesn't look like peace. It doesn't look like certainty. It doesn't look like the composed figure on the cover of a book about stillness, sitting serenely while the world burns decoratively in the background. It looks like a person who is clearly under pressure and is choosing, visibly, sometimes with effort, not to be driven by that pressure. It looks like slowed breathing when the situation calls for panic, a lowered voice when the room is raising theirs, a pause before the response that everyone is waiting to see delivered badly. It looks, from the outside, like control. On the inside, it feels like grip. The grip of someone who knows that the moment they release their hold on their own center, they become another element of the chaos rather than someone capable of moving through it. That grip is not comfortable. It was never meant to be comfortable. It's strength under load. And strength under load is the only kind that counts. Here's the operational practice for staying centered when multiple things are breaking simultaneously. Triage ruthlessly. Not everything that feels urgent is urgent. Not everything that demands your attention deserves it. When chaos hits, the first act is not action, it's assessment. What actually requires my direct involvement right now? What can wait? What will resolve without me? What am I about to react to out of anxiety that has nothing to do with importance? Most people skip this step because assessment feels like inaction and inaction feels unbearable when things are wrong. But the 3 minutes you spend sorting real urgency from performed urgency saves hours of misdirected effort and preserves the cognitive clarity you need for the things that actually matter. Then, sequence. One thing. Not everything simultaneously. One thing, fully addressed, before the next. Chaos wants your attention scattered. Your job is to refuse that. Every moment of focused, sequential attention in a chaotic situation is an act of leadership over the situation. You're not fixing everything. You're refusing to be paralyzed by the fact that you can't. And throughout all of it, regulate the body first. Before the strategy, before the sequencing, before the triage, breathe. Deliberately slow your breath. which directly signals the nervous system to downshift from threat response to problem-solving mode. This is not metaphorical. It's physiology. The thinking you need access to when things are breaking is located in a part of your brain that panic physiologically disables. The breath is the fastest available path back to it. There's something this chapter needs to say that the others didn't, and it's the most human thing in this book. Staying calm in chaos does not mean not feeling it, does not mean suppressing the weight of it, pretending the difficulty isn't real, performing stability over genuine distress. You are allowed to feel the full weight of hard things. The goal was never to stop feeling. It was to stop letting what you feel make your decisions for you. Grief and groundedness can coexist. Pressure and clarity can coexist. Fear and forward motion can coexist. The binary you were handed, either you're falling apart or you're fine, is false. You can be neither. You can be someone who is carrying something heavy and moving anyway. Not because the weight isn't real, because you've decided that moving is more important than putting it down. That's not strength in spite of feeling. That's strength that includes feeling and goes anyway. 12 chapters built a structure. The voice, the respect, the freedom, the stillness, the presence, the leadership, the capacity, the economy, the resilience, the detachment, the boundaries. Every layer placed deliberately, tested individually. This chapter is the storm that tests the whole building at once. And the building holds. Not because it was built from perfect materials, because it was built with intention, from the foundation up, in the right sequence. Because you didn't skip the chapters that were uncomfortable. Because you didn't reach for the output without doing the work underneath it. The structure holds because you built it honestly. But here's the question that the holding raises, quietly, in the aftermath of the storm, when the noise recedes and you're still standing. What exactly did you just use to stay upright? Was it belief? Habit? Genuine mastery? Or is there still a gap between the performance of solidity and the real thing? There's only one way to close that gap, and it's the one thing no chapter can give you, only point you toward. What happens when skill finally becomes certainty? Chapter 14. Competence is the spine of confidence. At some point, the affirmations run out. Not because they don't help. Some of what was built in Chapter 2 was real and necessary. But there's a ceiling to what you can talk yourself into, and eventually you hit it. You've done the inner work. You've adjusted the thermostat. You've built the habits of self-respect and boundary holding and emotional regulation. And still, in certain rooms, facing certain challenges, there's a flicker of something that none of the mental architecture fully quiets. Doubt. Not the loud, corrosive kind. The quiet kind. The kind that asks, just before the moment that matters, but can you actually do this? There is only one answer to that question that works permanently. And it isn't a thought. It isn't a belief. It isn't a morning practice or a reframe or a well-constructed internal narrative. It's proof. There's a version of confidence this book has not yet named directly because the other chapters had to come first. It's the version that doesn't require maintenance. The version that doesn't need daily reinforcement, doesn't wobble when the affirmations slip, doesn't depend on your mood or your last win or whether anyone in the room has validated you recently. It's called competence, and it is the spine that every other chapter in this book hangs from. All the stillness, the presence, the self-direction, the resilience, these are genuinely valuable. They are also, without the underlying bedrock of actual ability, a beautiful frame around an empty canvas. You can carry yourself with authority. You can speak with economy and hold boundaries without apology and stay calm in chaos. But if the thing you're projecting certainty about is a thing you haven't actually developed, if behind the composed exterior is a gap between what you present and what you can deliver, part of you knows it. And that knowledge has a texture. It feels like performance rather than truth. It generates a specific low-grade vigilance, the vigilance of someone who is managing an impression rather than simply expressing a reality. Real competence eliminates that vigilance. When you genuinely know what you're doing, not theoretically, not aspirationally, but from the accumulated evidence of having done it repeatedly under varying conditions, the confidence that emerges doesn't need to be managed. It just is. It sits in you the way fluency sits in someone who has spoken a language for 20 years. Not retrieved, just there. The distinction between borrowed confidence and earned confidence is one of the most important things this book can leave you with. Borrowed confidence is situational. It's the confidence that comes from a recent win, a good piece of feedback, a day when things went well and you felt capable. It's real in the moment. It's also fragile, contingent on conditions that will change, dependent on results that won't always go your way. Borrowed confidence is what most self-help produces, if it produces anything. A temporary elevation that fades when the next difficulty arrives and reveals that the underlying structure wasn't reinforced by anything real. Earned confidence is different in kind, not just degree. It's the confidence that comes from having done something enough times, in enough conditions, including the difficult ones, that you've closed the gap between "I think I can handle this" and "I know I can handle this because I have." That knowledge, specific, personal, evidence-based, is the only thing that doesn't erode under pressure. Because pressure cannot argue with your own history. Nobody can take your reps from you. Nobody can invalidate the hours. Nobody can walk into the room and tell you that the 10,000 difficult iterations you've put in don't count. The work is real. The competence it produces is real. And the confidence that grows from that competence is, finally, not a thing you have to maintain. It's a thing you simply are. This has a specific implication that's uncomfortable enough that most people skip over it. If you want the confidence that doesn't require maintenance, you have to do the work that doesn't feel like confidence building. You have to get in the room before you're ready and do the thing badly at first, and do it again less badly and again until the fumbling becomes fluency. There is no shortcut through this. There is no reframe that substitutes for repetition. There is no belief system that replaces actual hours of actual practice in actual conditions. This is where the mental work of the previous 13 chapters meets its physical counterpart. The inner voice is calibrated. The self-respect is practiced. The approval dependency is dismantled. The boundaries hold. The emotional regulation is built. Now you have to take all of that stable interior into the arena, repeatedly, unglamorously, with full acceptance of the learning curve, and build the thing that the interior was preparing you to build. Skill. Real, specific, tested, refined skill in the domain that matters to you. Think about what mastery actually feels like from the inside, not the mythology of it, the reality. It doesn't feel like certainty about outcomes. Masters fail. They fail regularly, often publicly, and without the failure meaning what it would mean to someone less experienced. What mastery feels like is certainty about process. The deep, unspoken knowledge that you understand the terrain, that you've mapped it through direct experience, that you know what to do when things go wrong because things have gone wrong before and you navigated it. Not certainty that you'll win, certainty that you can play. That's the feeling this chapter is pointing toward. Not the feeling that nothing will go wrong. The feeling that when it does, you have something real underneath you. Not a belief system, not a morning practice. A body of work that speaks for itself every time self-doubt opens its mouth. The work closes the argument. Every time. There's a practical structure for how competence compounds if you're intentional about building it rather than hoping it accumulates accidentally. Deliberate repetition over comfortable repetition. The reps that build you are not the ones that stay inside what you already know you can do. They're the ones that push the ceiling, the attempt that's slightly beyond current ability, the context slightly more demanding than the last one, the performance given when not quite ready for that audience. Every one of those stretched reps adds to the evidence base in a way that comfortable repetition never will. Honest assessment over flattering feedback. The people who build genuine competence fastest are not the ones who surround themselves with the most encouragement. They're the ones who insist on accurate reflection of where they actually are, who find the feedback that stings a little because it's true, who review their own performance with the same unsparing eye they'd bring to someone else's work. Flattery feels better. Accuracy builds faster. Volume before perfection. Competence is not built by attempting things only when you're certain you'll do them well. It's built by attempting things at volume. Many iterations, many conditions, many variations, and letting the pattern of the attempts teach you what isolated, careful attempts never could. You learn more from 50 imperfect reps than from 5 perfect ones. The imperfection is not waste. It's data. 13 chapters built an interior that the world cannot easily move. This chapter builds the one thing that makes that interior permanently inhabitable rather than aspirationally maintained. Because here's the truth that this book has been circling from the beginning. You cannot sustain the confidence described in these pages on mindset alone. Mindset is the scaffolding. Competence is the structure. You build the scaffolding first because you need something to build from. But the scaffolding was never meant to be permanent. It was always in service of the real construction. The real construction is a person who knows what they can do because they have done it, who walks into rooms not because they've convinced themselves they belong, but because their record has made the argument for them, who faces difficulty not with a practiced performance of calm, but with the genuine, grounded ease of someone who has navigated difficulty before and has the scar tissue to prove it. That person doesn't need the morning ritual to prop them up, doesn't need the room's approval to feel solid, doesn't need the outcome to go their way in order to know they showed up correctly. They need nothing from the outside because they've built everything necessary on the inside. Which brings us, finally, to the chapter that was always the destination. Not the chapter about a technique or a practice or a reframe. The chapter about what you become when all of this is real, when the work is done, when the reps are logged, when the scaffolding comes down, and what's left is simply you. Standing in a room, needing nothing from it. What does that actually look like? Chapter 15. The most dangerous thing in the room is someone who wants nothing from it. You've been in rooms like this before. You just weren't this person yet. There's always one. Not the loudest, not the most decorated, not the one working hardest to be noticed. The one who seems, at some structural level, complete. Not arrogant. Arrogance is hunger wearing a costume. Not indifferent. Indifference is fear wearing a different one. Something else. Something that reads, immediately and without explanation, as a person who came to contribute rather than to collect, who has nothing riding on the room's reaction, who would be exactly the same person if the room were empty. That quality, that specific, unmistakable quality, is what this entire book was building toward. Not a technique, not a posture, not a practiced stillness or a calibrated silence or a well-maintained boundary, though all of those things are part of the structure. Something deeper than any of them, an identity. The identity of someone who needs nothing from the outside because they've built everything necessary on the inside. Here's what that actually means in practice, stripped of abstraction. It means you walk into a negotiation without needing it to go your way in order to remain whole. You make the offer, state the position, hold the line. And if the answer is no, you leave the same person who entered. Disappointed perhaps, informed certainly, diminished not at all. It means you share the work, the real work, the work that matters to you, without needing the response to validate it. You made the thing because it was worth making. You put it forward because it was ready. What happens to it after that is a separate question from whether it was worth doing. It means you show up in relationships without the quiet, constant negotiation of, am I enough? Do they approve? Are we okay running underneath every exchange? You're present, fully, simply present, not monitoring, not managing, not performing. Just there. It means the question you bring into every room has permanently shifted. Not will they like me? That question is retired. Not will this go well? That question was never yours to answer. The question, the only question, is, did I show up as the person I've built? If yes, regardless of outcome, regardless of reception, regardless of whether the room rewarded it, you're done. The transaction with yourself is complete. This is not a destination you arrive at and stay. Name that clearly, because the myth of arrival is one of the last traps on this particular road. There will be days when the old reflexes surface, when the approval hunger flickers back, when the over-explanation escapes before you caught it, when someone gets under your skin in the specific way that person has always gotten under your skin, and you react before you lead. When the inner voice runs old programming for a few hours and you don't notice until the damage is done. These days are not evidence that the work didn't hold. They're evidence that you're human, operating inside the same nervous system that was wired by years of different programming. The work doesn't eliminate the old reflexes. It gives you a faster recovery. It shortens the distance between falling into the pattern and recognizing it. It reduces the intensity of each episode and the duration of each spiral, until eventually what used to take days to shake takes hours. What used to take hours takes minutes. What used to destabilize you for a week leaves only a faint impression. That compression, that accelerating recovery, is the evidence that the structure is real, not perfect days, shorter distances back to yourself. There's one last thing that needs to be said about what it means to need nothing, because it gets misread in a way that matters. Needing nothing from the outside does not mean wanting nothing. Wanting is healthy. Wanting drives effort, fuels ambition, makes life worth living. You should want. Deeply, specifically, without apology. The difference is this: wanting something and being okay if it doesn't come. Pursuing something with full effort and full presence, and releasing it completely if the answer is no. Not as resignation, as genuine freedom. The freedom of someone whose pursuit is not held hostage by the result, who can go after something hard, lose it, and remain intact, who can succeed at something significant and not need the success to be what makes them valid. That freedom is not indifference. It's the opposite of indifference. It's the ability to care fully about something without making your wholeness contingent on how it resolves. That's the highest form of it. That's what the entire architecture of this book was building the conditions for. Think back to who opened Chapter 1. Over-explaining in a room that didn't ask for an explanation. Running a thermostat set low by other people's hands. Building self-respect in theory while eroding it in practice. Handing the remote to anyone who reached for it. Reacting to every provocation like clockwork. Apologizing with the body before speaking a single word. Waiting for the world to confirm what should have been decided internally a long time ago. That person was not weak. That person was operating with the programming they'd been given. Doing the best available work with a tool set that was built for someone else's comfort rather than their own strength. This person, the one who has done the work in these pages, who has sat with the uncomfortable chapters and resisted the urge to skim past the parts that stung, this person has new programming, not installed from the outside, built from the inside, layer by layer, chapter by chapter, in the sequence that sequence required. The foundation came first, then the structure, then the finishing work. Now the building stands. And here, finally, is the truth that the whole book was pointing toward, the sentence that makes everything click into place, the one worth carrying. The world cannot give you what you've already given yourself. Not its approval, not its validation, not its confirmation that you belong, that you're capable, that you're enough. You've already decided those things. You decided them in the quiet acts of self-respect nobody witnessed, in the boundary held when it would have been easier to let it go, in the discomfort walked toward instead of away from. in the rejection absorbed and extracted from, in the silence held when the reaction was right there and ready, in the outcome released with clean hands. The world didn't give you those things. You built them, which means the world cannot take them. That's the final shift. Not a feeling, an identity. The person who needs nothing from the room doesn't walk in performing that freedom. They walk in simply having it. And the room, without being asked, without being managed, without anything being demanded of it, responds to that differently than it has ever responded to you before. Not because you changed your strategy, because you changed what you are. Now stop reading. Go be that in a room that will test whether it's real, because that's the only place it ever becomes permanent. Conclusion. You were never waiting to become this. Do you remember the room? The one you walked into 3 minutes late, shoulders already apologizing, half-smile thrown at nobody, eyes scanning for the verdict before anyone had even looked up. The one where your body was broadcasting, "I'm not sure I'm allowed to be here," before you'd said a single word. The one where the explanation was already forming, for being late, for taking up space, for existing in a room that hadn't yet confirmed you were welcome in it. That person picked up this book. Look at the distance between that person and where you're standing now. Not the distance of time, the distance of construction. Every chapter was a layer. Not inspiration laid over the surface of the old structure, but actual reconstruction from the foundation up. The voice that was running you has been redirected. The self-respect that was theoretical has been practiced into something structural. The approval mechanism has been identified and systematically starved. The emotional reactivity has been replaced, or is being replaced, with a stillness that belongs to you, not the situation. The body is no longer apologizing. The outcomes have been released. The boundaries hold. The work is being done. That's not a small distance. Don't let familiarity with the journey make you underestimate it. What was asked of you in these pages was genuinely hard. Not the reading, the application. The moment in a real conversation when you caught the explanation forming and chose to stop. The specific person whose disapproval you sat with instead of rushing to resolve. The room you walked into carrying new posture and new intention while the old reflexes were still pulling at the edges. The rejection you extracted from instead of collapsed into. The outcome you released with clean hands when everything in you wanted to grip it tighter. Nobody saw most of that work. It happened in ordinary moments, in unremarkable rooms, in the gap between the stimulus and the response that nobody else was watching. That's where the real construction happened. In the invisible reps. In the daily choices that don't announce themselves as significant while they're being made and only reveal their weight in aggregate. When you look up one day and realize you're standing differently than you used to. That the room feels different. That you feel different in it. That work was yours. All of it. The credit belongs nowhere else. Here is the thing worth carrying. The one sentence. The reframe that makes everything in this book click into place 6 months from now when you need it most. You were never becoming this. You were uncovering it. The confidence that's been built here was not installed. It was excavated from underneath the over-explaining, the approval hunger, the reactivity, the shrinking, the performance. Underneath all of that, there was always a person who didn't need the room's permission, who was always capable of the stillness, the presence, the self-direction, who was always strong enough to hold the line, absorb the no, release the grip. The work didn't create that person. It removed what was covering them. Which means this was always you. The work just cleared the way. The last thing this book will ask of you is not gratitude, and it's not reflection. It's return. Go back to the room. The specific room, the professional context, the relationship, the situation, where the old version of you was most reliably diminished. Where the approval seeking was most automatic, the reactivity most predictable, the shrinking most complete. Go back to that exact room. Not to prove something, not to perform what you've built, to find out whether it's real, because the only place anything built in these pages becomes permanent is in the friction of the actual world, with actual people, in situations that have no obligation to cooperate with your growth. The building was constructed in here. Its permanence gets decided out there. Go find out what you're made of now. The answer is waiting in the next room. You almost talked yourself out of entering.